Oh, mamma mia, it's good to be back. Dr. James, Dr. Mike, it's the weekly webinar. We're here to answer your questions. But first, quick housekeeping note. Guys, we're going to have a quick format change on the weekly webinar because of how the liberal media controlled algorithms work. God damn it, Obama. No, I'm just kidding. Because of the Partially kidding. Because of how those work, we're going to actually switch the weekly webinar to a bi-weekly webinar, which we're going to record on the first and third week of every month. And typically that will mean it'll probably air the second and fourth week of every month. So just keep that in mind. We ended up putting out so much content, I think so quickly, that some of our videos weren't getting the love and the attention that we wanted. So we're trying to ameliorate that for now. So we appreciate your patience in dealing with some of these changes. So if you are a weekly listener, just a heads up, we're gonna be switching to a bi-weekly format. So don't get too upset with us the first couple of weeks as we transition into this new format. So thanks in advance.
Boom, that covers it. Let's get to the first.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okie. So first up is Henrik Anderson.
Where's Henny? Let's see.
Top, I think top. Was for me anyway.
There he is. Oh yeah, he was top.
All right.
Upvotes.
I know, man. This guy's a pimp. Every webinar, he's top tier.
That's true.
He should just run the Q&A. All right. He asks, he's like, no, you guys don't understand. I ask the questions. I don't know the answers. Like, right. Okay. It's a good webinar call.
So on the second week, Henrik will do the webinar.
Yeah. Henrik asks the questions. That's what the show is called. And he just asks questions and people are like, that's a good question. And he doesn't answer it.
People enjoy his Norwegian accent.
That's right. All right. He asks, how much hypertrophy are you leaving on the table if you never go all the way to MRV? How big of a difference is there when going all the way to MRV compared to A, ending the accumulation phase just before MRV, B, not increasing volume any further than halfway to MRV, stopping at 15 sets when your MRV is 20. Does your answer go for all training ages or does it vary? So James, is it okay if I start on this one?
Yeah, go for it.
So A, ending the accumulation phase just before MRV probably cost you almost no gains, maybe very, very few gains. And it's certainly probably about even on the risk to benefit ratio. So it's totally fine. As a matter of fact, much of the time, myself, Jared, and Charlie, and James actually will stop just short of MRV because we kind of know, like based on how this week goes, that we're barely hanging on to performance and next week will be MRV, but like we're basically just before it or right there and we're not going to go over it. So we just stop. So that means maybe half of our weeks are wrong guesses and we're stopping just before MRV. We could have done another week, and half of our weeks are correct guesses. We stopped at MRV. So I think that's totally fine as long as you aren't accidentally stopping way early from your MRV just when things are getting hard and you could have potentially just kept going. And then B, not increasing volume any further than halfway to MRV. Can you get good gains like that? Yes. Can you get your best gains? Maybe not. I think especially as you go into the very advanced category and gains become difficult. I think at that point it starts to pay to push your body to its limits on occasion. And that means going more than halfway up to MRV is probably a good idea. So I would say that for beginners, it's probably fine because everything's fine for beginners. But for folks that are more advanced, I think that you're potentially missing out on some real decent gains there on the other side of the halfway point. And the way it works with hypertrophy training is oftentimes like your maximum adaptive volume will actually occur pretty close to your maximum recoverable. Just fatigue sneaks up on you so quick. So you might actually not even be at your maximum adaptive volume if you stop halfway through. I think if you like stop at 17 or 18 sets, that might be close to your maximum adaptive for that mesocycle. But I don't think 15 is if your true MRV is 20. I think with 15, you're just still ramping up. Can you make up for it by increasing like intensity and stuff? Yeah, that comes with its own trade-offs. So I do think that it is a cost, probably not much to beginners. Intermediates, it's probably okay, but say push to MRV every now and again. And for advanced folks, I think if you're really like, especially if you're really interested in maximizing your gains, not going to MRV is essentially, and you can hypothesize it like this. Like you could have done another 2 weeks of training where you pushed your squat another 10 to 20 pounds up for the same reps, but you didn't. You just stopped and started deloading. Like, man, that might be leaving some gains on the table. It really may be I think there's just a really interesting literature review came out recently that was by Brad Schoenfeld on failure training. And it really warmed up my innards because it reflected something I had predicted years ago, and something James and I have been hypothesizing for even longer, is that training to failure is just not really important for most people, but for the very advanced, it might have a little bit more utility, because at that point, kind of nothing really does the trick to get your body to grow other than pushing it maximally pretty frequently. And it sucks because I wish there was other ways to push it, but I think that's just it. And that's what this lit review showed, is the potential benefit of going to failure is greater for advanced people than for beginners. So I think that same thing probably applies to volume, where if you never really push your volume as high as it could go, you may not realize your maximum gains. So I think that that's probably the best answer I have for that question, James.
Yeah, that was really good. And take that, reps in reserve guy. You hear that?
Oh man, he's great. Some of his views are really funny, and some are just like, oh my God, you never have sex. Like, you're clearly like Austrian or German incel, and you never show your face because it's not the kind of face you want to show. You may or may not train with weights. Like, it's a tough life. Tough life for me nowadays.
He always kind of gets really close to kind of calling like RP people out, right, but never quite goes there. He always is like kind of hinting at it. I think he's really funny, and I think it's all in good fun. I like that guy's face.
Yeah, I wonder if it's all in good fun. I can't tell, but the stuff that's funny is like,
I at least think it's in good fun. And if he jabs at us, like, I don't mind, because
for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was a really good answer. I think kind of the option A is completely acceptable. And I don't think you're leaving a lot of gains on the table. In the book that I'm working on for sport training in particular, I make the case that for training for fitness stuff, like whether it's strength, power, endurance, in a sporting setting, you might actually say it's actually advantageous to never train to MRV because of the opportunity cost of going to MRV and its influence on other things. For example, the amount of gain you might get from training longitudinally up to your MAV is here. MRV is like maybe right here, right? But the amount of effort to bridge this gap is massive. And so you might make the fitness fatigue paradigm cost and say, actually bridging that gap for the very marginal amount of gain that I'll get from that is not worth the cost that it's going to have on my other areas of training, such as tactics and skill development, et cetera. Whereas in hypertrophy training, it's kind of up to you. There's definitely going to be like a more systemic fatigue limitation to training to MRV. So that might also influence your decision on whether or not to do that. If you're somebody who is prone to calling your mesocycles as a result of systemic fatigue limitations, you might not train any of your individual muscles, or at least maybe the biggest ones, never quite to MRV, just so that you don't have to cut your mesocycles unnecessarily short due to systemic fatigue limitations. I think option B is probably, I think Mike hit it on the head. So like for beginners, you don't really have to kind of worry about spanning this gap so much. You just kind of do some really rudimentary training. Once you hit the intermediate stage, now you're considering the MEV to MRV window gap and stopping halfway along. Are you leaving some gains on the table? Sure. Yep. Mike wants to chime in.
Also, as an intermediate, you got to start exploring what that window really looks like, because you may not even know your MRV. You may think it's 20, but it's really 30. And like, you may just be really shitting yourself. So that's something I forgot to say the first time, is like, sometimes you got to go to your MRV just to make sure it's still where it is. And sometimes you actually are like, oh, wow, I can keep going.
Yeah. And keep in mind too, like this applies to MAV and MRV as well, but those things are going to shift longitudinally over time as you gain fitness across the board. So not only in the short term, like your ability to generate really big overloads on whatever movements that you've been training for week to weeks. And that's the case of MAV. So your MAV in week 1 is going to look different than your MAV, 12 weeks in, because you've been using the same movement and you've been really dialed into it. So now you actually have to push a much higher threshold for stimulus. MRV is the same idea. It's going to keep incrementally shifting up to a point until you get to advanced, and it might actually dip back down. So getting into that idea, an intermediate, yes, you can kind of do that, and you'll make okay gains, but maybe not the best gains. It's a trade-off. For advanced, I don't really think you can get away with that, because the MEV to MRV window ends up shrinking much more significantly as you become advanced, right? So you might be like, oh, I'll just go halfway. Well, it's like, there really isn't much halfway to go. Either you're doing hard training or you're not. So you kind of can run into that junk volume space where you think you're doing hard training, but you're really kind of training at like MEV, maybe even below MEV, in that gray zone between MV and MEV. So I would say if you're an advanced athlete, which again, Mike and I always make the joke that you don't want to be in that position, because you're kind of, I don't want to say all or nothing, but it's basically hard training or not. And there's not a lot of gray area in between. So you don't have a lot of room to work with there. Was there anything else? Oh, for training. Yeah, we kind of touched on training aids. Yeah, we're good.
All right. Earth Savior is up next.
Captain Plan.
Hell of a name.
Got it.
So Earth Savior asks, hey, docs, how would you address an uneven bench press? I find that my left arm locks out. However, my right arm is always slightly bent. I can also go a little deeper on the right side and find that my right hand isn't as nicely stacked above my wrists. As a result, the left side of my chest gets a better stimulus. Whereas on the right side, I always get a big pump in my tricep and shoulder, which sometimes leads to elbow or wrist issues. I also find that the barbell is wonky when I squat and worst at the bottom. I was wondering if either of you have come across these.
Sorry.
You're a dick, James.
No, I'm wondering if he actually has like a significant limb length discrepancy.
Sure. If you ever come across these issues, so how have you managed it? Thanks for all the awesome content. So like when I squat, I point my right foot out just a little bit more than my left foot because it feels better that way. And I don't really question it much more because everything works super well when I do that. So first is the myth that everything needs to be completely symmetrical. It doesn't. As long as it's getting the job done and you don't have any joint connective tissue problems, it's not a problem. Everyone's asymmetrical to some extent. If you're really concerned about it, and if it is causing problems, I would say it's a good idea to do some machine stuff or something like that this thing isn't an issue with, and retool your free weights by starting a little bit lower and really working on technique so that failure is what you consider when things start to turn different. So you really focus on technique, really focus on keeping both sides pretty similar. And then failure is when they don't and you stop then. And so it gets you a lot of technique training to become a little bit more even. And I think that goes probably a pretty long way. It can make you, once you work back up to heavyweight, you're just a much more even lifter. I will say, though, that it's okay to make slight adjustments that are asymmetrical because, very likely your muscles, insertions, or bones are to some extent asymmetrical, and or the innervation of them is not even. That happens all the time. It happens to everyone. And there's kind of no real making up for that in any foundational way. Like if your body ends up being like one pec is bigger than the other, you can always make up for that. And I have a whole video on YouTube on how to do that, bringing up lagging body parts and another one on asymmetries. And it's just something you can just Google and it comes up. And there's a real process there that's pretty straightforward. But that doesn't mean like once you bring up your other pec that all of a sudden your benching is going to fix itself. Like it might always be weird. And that's probably a little bit, it's probably okay. You did say it gives you elbow or wrist issues. That would be a reason to sort of rework your technique and stop a little bit short of failure and make sure your technique is always super spot on. But other than that, I honestly, like a lot of folks who talk about addressing imbalances and stuff, it never really seems to work all that well because you're dealing with sort of inherent asymmetries that there has to be an imbalance for you to produce proper movement to begin with. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I like what Dr. Mike said. It was technique should be the primary focus when you're kind of addressing these issues. And I think Dr. Mike made a video, correct me if I'm wrong here, buddy, if addressing muscle asymmetries that you can watch. So that's on our YouTube channel, I believe. I actually think since it's not just a bench press issue, it seems like you're having kind of transient issues with this asymmetry. I would be very curious to see if you actually have a significant limb length discrepancy on that side. So that would be something you could actually measure if you are somewhat familiar with kind of bony landmarks on the body, or if you just have somebody who's like an exercise science person and wouldn't mind helping you out doing that measurement. I would be very curious because it seems like you're having issues in other movements besides the bench press. So that might be an instance where you have like a clinical imbalance, which normally Mike and I are pretty quick to dismiss, but this is one where, okay, it's manifesting in not only upper body movements, but also in like your positioning on lower body movements, and you're having kind of injuries that are occurring as a result. So to me, that would kind of point towards, yeah, you might actually have a clinical imbalance, maybe get that checked out and then go from there. Unfortunately, if you do, a lot of the processes in addressing it are still kind of the same issue where it's you adjust your technique accordingly, you adjust your movements accordingly to minimize pain, to maximize mind muscle connection on the other side, et cetera. So unfortunately, even if it is like a bony problem, you still have to work around it largely the same way, but you might be able to get some help from like a PT or somebody like Quinn Hanak if it is like a clinical imbalance, and they might have greater insights as to how to work around that than Dr. Mike or I.
There you go. It's tough, man, because it almost requires you to, at some level, accept that perfection may not be possible, which fucking blows.
Yeah. And it's, again, you can't, it's not like you can shave an inch off your arm, you know? So it's like, what are you going to do? You know?
All right. Yordan Tsanyev.
Just want to note 46 upvotes on this one. My God. What a question.
He says, a question about some pains and aches due to training. First, I'm fully aware I'm neither seeking nor receiving medical advice, just asking for some shared perspectives and personal experience. With that out of the way, I'm experiencing what I can best self-diagnose as medial epicondylitis right on the inner side of the elbow on both arms. I think these months of home training, barbells and dumbbell work only, turned to be too much for my bitch-ass elbows, even with Versa grips. I cannot tell what is hurting me, as nothing hurts while training, so I have not been able to experiment with changes of exercise or altering technique. Could be jerking off, but I doubt it. I'm nowhere near my MRV there. So here are the options I'm exploring. Please let me know what you think about them. If I may be missing something, you had success with similar situations. Option A is active rest. Option B is maintenance training, but for what it would make sense to be pulling, causing the issue. But I read people get this from all sorts of pulling, pushing, and flies. C, fortunately, the gyms are reopening in my region. I can do exclusively light machine work, which would fit nicely with my planned metabolite meso that's just coming. I'm also waiting on my BBC 157 and TV 500, which I will try. Thoughts on them? I also have access to free PRP treatments. What the fuck? Who the fuck do you know, man? That's amazing.
Yeah.
Give it a shot. Thank you so much in advance. So I would say that you should take active rest and you should go to the gym after and start to ease into hypertrophy work and reintroduce movements that have nothing to do with your elbows first, or minimum theoretical elbow pain induction, and see how it goes. You may find that you have no elbow pain whatsoever, and then you slowly reintroduce movements every couple weeks that may hurt your elbows, and you do them very low volumes, and you see, okay, so I started doing skull crushers again with dumbbells, and then the elbow pain came back, so I think that's what's really doing it. Introducing one or two movements at a time can really let you figure this out. So that's the thing there. When I was training exclusively at home during the lockdown, I ran into an adductor strain, like kind of a chronic strain that I just like recovered from probably pretty completely just a few weeks ago. And I had finished training at home months ago. That's how long this shit took to recover, because I was doing so many posterior chain bent over position things. Because we were rowing 3 times a week, and it's all bent over rows because there's no fucking machines. And that caused my adductor strain just sort of compound on itself, and it really fucking blew. So I totally hear you on the fact that people who say like, man, you only need fucking barbells and dumbbells, you don't need machines, like they just don't train hard enough. They're like the kind of people that post like, they do like, what's that shit called, James, when they like street shit, or like they do planks and shit like that.
Oh, remember there was like that came up a week or two ago where somebody was like, do you know about like street powerlifting? And we were like, what?
Like, what? Right. So basically like shit like that, people say, and they're all recreationally training. If you're training a bit more intently, then machines are fucking awesome. So, so that would be my best advice to you. If you run into a situation where that active rest doesn't heal your elbow issues, and or when you start training at all, they come back, then I could look into going to a doctor to get some diagnosis going. That's probably your best option. You don't want to start PRP treatments because you don't know if it's tendinous. You don't know what it is. In general, if you take BPC 157 during active rest in the beginning of your recovery, you will probably have very good healing. BPC 157 is miraculous. I don't have any personal experience with TB 500, but if it's anything like BPC 157, it's the miracle cure. So they're great.
These all sound like droids on Star Wars.
Literally, they are droids, and they open up your elbows and do surgery. But yeah, other peptides, they're fractions of the growth hormone total peptide. Like growth hormone does like 1 trillion things, and one of the small fractions is the tissue healing part. BPC 157 is the tissue healing component just by itself. I've used it before. It's fucking awesome. So have fun. Again, PRP is cool, but it's a bit involved. And I would try some more minor shit before I went and got PRP. And also the question is, almost in every case before going to PRP, you'd like to have a diagnosis from a medical doctor before you just go in there and start shooting shit into yourself. Shooting biologics specifically. James?
Yeah, really good advice. Jordan, this is my life. I saw this question and I was like, oh my God, this is me. This is literally me. So I have this exact problem where because I work out at home and I'm limited to, until recently, mostly barbells and dumbbells, I am constantly in and out of what I also have self-diagnosed as medial epicondylitis. And for me, I can feel it right on that fucking epicondyle. It just kills me. And so I've done a pretty good job managing it. But as you said, if you work out with primarily barbells and dumbbells, these are the types of trade-offs that you make, right? You're going to have more wear and tear type injuries just as a result of the modalities that you're using. So a couple things that you can do, right? Mike already outlined a bunch of really good strategies. And active rest is pretty much always, whenever there's injuries or stuff going on, always a good place to start. For me, it was narrowing down the exercises that I could tell were exacerbating it. So as you said, sometimes they don't cause pain while you're doing it. It only manifests like later on when you're in like the second meso of a block and you're like, God, my elbows are acting up. What's doing it? And so it's hard to kind of nail it down. So it is a very slow and tedious process of guess and check. So that's kind of the unfortunate news in some of this regard, is because it takes a long time to figure it out. You have to kind of start with a pretty clean slate and then make very minor adjustments to exercises over time. So I have figured out for me that JM presses, although seem to cause immense growth in my triceps. Like when I have blocks of JM presses, my arms get noticeably bigger. They also get blown up in that medial epicondylitis, guaranteed. If I do them, I know that I'm going to have problems. Parallel grip pull-ups and pull-downs, same thing. Some variations on hammer curls, close grip curls, same thing. So for me, there's like a handful of exercises, which is taking me like years to figure out. That's kind of the downside, is it's taking me like a couple of years to figure out. Those are just a no-no. And I figured out if I put them into the mix within a few months, it's going to flare up. Now it's going to be different for you. Like it might not be the same movements. So don't copy me and say, well, James said, don't do parallel pull downs. No, it's just, we're built different ways. That's just one that's not good for me. You got to figure it out for you. Number two, you can start using more isolation movements. So if you're doing like, for me, it was like a lot of presses and a lot of like pull up or assisted pull up variations. And so what you might find you have to do is stop doing quite as many compounds and maybe introduce some more isolation movements. One of the things that I got was the cable stack attachment to my squat rack, which really opened up a lot of options for me in terms of like, I can do like cable lats, I can do some different arm stuff, right? Just more options there. So instead of doing like, okay, I'm doing this bench press on this day, this bench press on this day, and this dumbbell press on another day, maybe think about doing some flies or, anything along those lines. As Mike said, like if there's anything where you just feel like direct tension in your elbow, even if it's not pain, like again, for me, the JM presses, like I feel it, which is good, right? You're like, oh yeah, this is working really hard, but I also feel it like up in that forearm and elbow area, indicating it's probably not great. One thing that I have used, and I hate going here, and I'm cringing, and I know Mike's going to cringe too. Oh, I hate to go here, but it does help. The compression sleeves is something that I have worn with great success when it does flare up. So the problem with compression sleeve is it's a Band-Aid. It'll help kind of get you through when it's already flared up. It's not going to help prevent that flare up because whatever it is that you're doing in training is causing it. And the compression sleeves won't do dick about that. But if you get the like actual heavy duty, not the like, spats ones. I mean, I'm talking about the real heavy pressure ones that are hard to pull on. Those will kind of help. And the nice thing about those is you can, train, wait a couple hours, and then put them on for the rest of the day, even while you sleep. And it does kind of have like a very slow trickling effect of ameliorating some of that inflammation. So those are things that I think are good. Unfortunately, there's no quick fix. Even taking active rest might make them feel better temporarily, but if you're still doing movements that are causing the problem, they'll just flare back up again. So it's probably being redundant at this point, but it's a slow process. Try and be as methodical and scientific as you can. Don't just clump and say like, okay, we got all these different movements, I'm taking them all away. Try and do them like one or two movements at a time and figure out which, push or pull movements are really bothering you.
Next up is Filip Gromatakovsky.
Holy Philippe. Got it.
He has a very simple question. That is a very simple answer. Is there a compounding effect on rest and recovery? Would resting 2 days in a row during a week versus 2 days with training in between your in between recover you more, the same or less? I understand recovery starts as soon as you walk away from your last set, and ATP, CP refilling is way faster than protein synthesis that occurs later. How linear is the recovery after that? So the thing is I have good reason to believe, we'll see what James says about this, that there is actually a small compounding effect, that taking 2 days in a row recovers you to a qualitative depth that is greater than if you just take 2 days off during the week, but it's only 1 day off at a time. I don't take 2 days off at a time because I train so much I can't afford to do that. But if I was training 5 days a week, you better believe I would take 2 consecutive days off. And I used to train like that. And the recovery you get from 2 days off is really, really, really legit versus kind of spreading the recovery around and not getting as much quality recovery if you do it a little bit more often. Now, mind you, the biggest variable there is how many days off a week do you take? The more you take, the more you recover. But there is absolutely something to say for that nuance there. That 2 days in a row, I think, does offer you a little bit of extra quality. James?
Yeah, I that was a really good answer from Dr. Mike. So within that, so as Mike said, the primary variable there is how many days off do you take? But then kind of a secondary variable is, can you actually take them 2 days in a row, or do you have other things that you have to do? So a lot of people, their schedule is such that they have to take 2 interspersed days off at different points, right? And so it's one of those things where, yes, it might be better to take them 2 days back to back, but if your schedule doesn't allow for it and you're trying to cram it into a routine and it's not working, there's a trade-off to be made there too in terms of practicality, which, might kind of be a net zero at that point. I will say, although I agree with Dr. Mike that there is a compounding effect, I'm thinking this is more of a curvilinear kind of effect rather than like an exponential effect. It's not like you're going to take the next day and then all of a sudden, like everything is healed. It's like, okay, it was kind of linear and now it's like sloping up a little bit more as a result of taking 2 in a row rather than like an exponential, rocket ship level of recovery. So if it works for you, great. For some people, it doesn't work. And I don't think that you're really missing out on a ton if you have to take kind of throughout the week independent of each other. If it just works that in your schedule better, then that's probably good in the long term anyway.
Yeah. All right. Floo, Floo.
No, flu.
Says, hey, docs, do you have any post-surgery tips? In a few days, I have an ankle surgery and can't walk around for 6 weeks. Obviously, I won't be able to train lower body, but how about my upper body? Does it hinder my recovery of my ankle when I'm getting sore on the upper body? How do I manage to not lose muscle and don't get fat since I won't be able to move? LOL and train hard. Thanks a lot. So first thing you got to do is ask your surgeon when you're okay to return to hard physical activity that does not involve your ankle. You're going to be very specific that you ask him that specifically. Hard physical. If you just say hard physical activity, he's going to say, you mean like running around, you fucking idiot, 6 weeks, right?
Or more. It might be like, no, not for a year.
Right, like, yeah, for a year or some shit. But you got to say, like, look, can I lift weights from my upper body? I won't touch my ankle at all. How does that work? And he might, because, yeah, there are systemic effects. He might want you to take 2 to 6 weeks off completely of everything. So for example, here's a mechanism. Sometimes when you have various surgeries, you have various components, pins or whatever, things that are stuck together. Transient high increases in blood pressure are real bad because they actually push shit aside, and blood pressure transfers to body pressure. Essentially, you end up kind of tearing the wound open if you got a lot of pressure on it, even if it's not directly using a limb. So that may be a real bad thing. So you got to ask your doctor. But so when he says, then yeah, you very slowly ease into upper body training that doesn't touch your ankle whenever he says you're allowed to, and then you won't lose any upper body mass. Matter of fact, you'll probably gain a shitload. And then as far as legs, you can ask him like, hey, like after 6 weeks, when you can start walking around, you say, hey, can I do some resistance training for the lower body that doesn't involve my ankle? And he'll probably say, yeah. And then you can do like leg extensions and leg curls till you're blue in the face and conserve and probably build a little bit of mass. And then slowly, as you're cleared for more and more activity, you can get back into training with your doctors, with your surgeons, supervision at all times for what you're doing. Not supervision, his signing off has to occur. Because you can really fuck yourself in the ass by getting in too early, transiently increasing blood pressure, popping open some of the stitching he's done, and then all of a sudden you got to get the surgery all over again, or it gets infected, or some other crazy kind of shit, or it heals wrong. Fuck, you don't want to do any of that shit.
Yeah, excellent answer. So with the caveats Dr. Mike already said about recovery timelines and doctor approval and et cetera, sometimes it's actually good to, once you are cleared for exercise, to train the contralateral leg, right? So that you're not losing muscle on that side. And that actual stimulation can have that cross-talking effect that can help you maintain some of the muscle on your ipsilateral surgery side. Another thing that you can do, which I know, bear with me, it sounds hippy-dippy, but I've researched it, it seems to be true, is that you can do mental practice for the muscles on the surgery side of the leg, which is like, I know this sounds lame, but just bear with me. It's basically thinking about training that muscle or moving that limb in such a way that you would in a training activity, and trying to really internalize and mindfully think about the proprioception of doing a particular exercise or an activity. So in the example of, let's say you can't move your right leg, but you want to try and think about preserving the muscle on your right leg. Training the left leg's probably not a bad idea because there's nervous system crosstalk. And on the right leg, you can actually just do what we call mindsets, which would be like, think about what it would feel like to do a set of 10 on a leg press or a knee extension or a hamstring curl on that leg. And not just superficially like, okay, yeah, do this, like something like this. If you actually think about your experience of what that is to go through that range of motion, to feel the tension, to feel the mind-muscle connection, to feel the proprioception of doing that movement, there is some evidence to suggest that that mental practice can help prevent deconditioning to some small degree. So I know that might sound kind of hippie for some people, but it's there. And if you're worried about losing muscle, you can do it. And tell you what, I wish I would have done that shit, because when I had my knee surgery, I did everything wrong, period. And I would, if I could go back, I would have done my PT, I would have listened to the doctor, I would have done the hippie shit, like the mental training, and I wouldn't have had a buff leg and a skinny leg for so long and looked stupid.
I got you one for you, James. I had an umbilical hernia surgery repair in, I think, 2008, and I pulled off my medical tape that was functioning as a stitch, because it said, like, in 24 hours, pull off all the dressings from the wound. I'm not a fucking doctor. That looked like dressing to me. So I was like, all right, I pulled off the dressing, and I was like, there's a piece of tape. Like, I didn't know they tape shit together. I pull off the tape, blood just starts coming out. I was like, all right. I called the surgeon. I was like, hey, like, I pulled off the tape and blood's coming out. And he like got mad. He's like, he's like, why the fuck would you do that? And I was like, hey, check this out, man. I'm not a fucking doctor. And, for me, they assume that tape as part of a wound dressing is not entirely outside of its, fucking linguistic contextual category, first of all, or second of all. And third of all, I never saw you after my surgery, motherfucker. I saw a nurse, and then I was sent home. You never told me shit. You gave me they gave me a fucking type out sheet. I read it. I interpreted it as I did. And he's like, all right. Well, just don't muck with it anymore. And I'm like, all right. Hey, thanks for nothing, you fucking dick. And yeah, fuck that guy. He's a piece of shit.
Some surgeons are real assholes. And granted, like, being an asshole is probably what makes them good at being a surgeon, but it doesn't change the fact that they have like shitty bedside manner.
Yeah, go hire someone with good bedside manner to tell me shit instead of being like, how are you feeling? I'm like, good. They're like, all right, you can just leave. I'm like, sweet.
I had a similar thing with mine where when I went in and they were like, yep, they diagnosed me with the ACL tear. He was like, oh, that's what you get for doing something like playing rugby. Now you'll never do anything athletic again. I was like, fuck you on so many levels, guy. Like, what are you talking about?
I'm about to do my last athletic thing and double like the fuck out of you.
Yeah. Went on to do plenty more athletic things.
Yeah, you went on to play rugby again, right?
Yeah, not to mention, like, had plenty of lifting PRs, picked up new sports and hobbies. Like, fuck out of here.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Not for nothing. Kickboxing.
Yeah, for real.
Pretty knee intensive.
Yeah, you would think. All right, next up is Alejandro Mayofret.
Got it.
He's for sure running drugs. But high level. That's the thing about like if you're a drug dealer, the more Hispanic and like colonial your name is, the higher up in the food chain you are. Like if your drug dealer's name is Skeeter, like he's not high up in the food chain. He cooks his own meth, maybe, or he sells other people's meth. But Alejandro, you don't fuck with Alejandro. You will disappear.
Mayofret's an interesting last name too.
Right. It's like not so Hispanic. So you think he's like super exotic. Like he's the guy that like makes people disappear. He's the Hispanic guy that you go to see on the plantation and he's got blue eyes and you're like, he's going to fucking kill me. This is it. He's the guy in the movies you don't fuck with. That's all I'm saying.
Totally with you on that.
Yeah. All right. And he always has a story to tell. Like before he fucks you up, he's like, my ancestors came to Colombia with nothing from Austria. And you're like, see, that's the Mayo threat. That's fucking Austrian. I knew it. And then he goes on to like, we had to do everything the hard way. And I'm not going to have my wealth taken from me. And you're like, look, Alejandro, I know.
I'm just dropping off your Uber Eats.
He just ordered like a sub or something like that.
Having a meltdown.
He's like, sorry, I thought you were someone else. You're like, can I leave? He's like, he tips you really well.
Enjoy your food.
You're like, all right. Yeah. And then you realize like he ordered mayo, but you put mustard, and you're like, run to your car as fast as possible. Drive away from
no.
Just leave your family behind. Anyway, all right, Alejandro, thanks for your name. Hi, docs. I have a question regarding specialization phase in hypertrophy. When choosing movements for the muscles in maintenance volume, should we bias towards exercise with low fatigue? For example, if chest is on the back burner, should we avoid barbell compounds to lower even more the overall fatigue and maybe a couple more sets for the prioritized muscles? Or is it insignificant? Those things don't matter as much. Thank you for the information you give us free. You are the best. Well, it's our pleasure. Those things do matter, but what you really are looking at is stimulus to fatigue ratio, not just fatigue. Because if the stimulus is pretty high and the fatigue is pretty low, you only have to do like 2 sets and you get all your muscle completely no loss, and also you get very low fatigue. On the other hand, if something is like an unbelievable raw stimulus magnitude, like it really grows a fuckload of muscle, but it also comes with pretty high fatigue. Yeah, like you may have to do very little work, but that fatigue might still be like, maybe I don't want to do it. A more specific answer is some movements, like when you go to MV, a lot of times it's to sort of reinvigorate those movements or those muscles, like for later, you want to potentiate them for later gains. You sure as hell don't want to beat up your joints during that time. So like if your idea of maintenance volume is doing like low bar squats and overhead standing barbell presses, yeah, they have great stimulus to fatigue ratios, but the raw stimulus magnitude is so high and the fatigue is pretty high. The ratio is still really good, but you just don't need that raw stimulus magnitude because you just want to keep the fatigue lower. Specifically to joints, connective tissues, you want to come back to low bar squats 4 weeks later and feel good instead of being like, I squatted heavy this whole time and yeah, I kept my muscle, but my back's fucked up and now I need to take time away. So yeah, like for beginners and intermediates, just high SFR exercises should always be your choice. For advanced people, when they go to maintenance volume, they actually can choose the overall very low fatiguing exercises to really kind of step away from that, especially if it's like not just specialization, but if it's like a low volume resensitization phase, like maybe it's just all machines and cables to really give your joints a break, and then you get into the free weight movements later. James, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. And like if the chest is using the chest example, like you might just get away with doing like 2 sets of like a dumbbell pec fly or something like that, and that's all you need. Whereas like you might also get a really good stimulus from doing something like a wide grip bench press, but it comes with so much more baggage from the increased load and the multiple joints and muscles involved. You might get more systemic spillover from that particular movement, which can then hinder your training in other ways. So in that case, like having the machines or other movements, which sometimes are just a little bit lower on the fatigue side, again, like a chest, like a pec deck fly or a dumbbell fly versus like a bench press, might be advantageous because it just frees up resources for whatever other thing that you're specializing in. Especially what you don't want, and this is something that might sound like, duh, of course not, but I think people make this mistake, is you don't want to pick a movement that is for a muscle that's on MV, which is going to have systemic spillover to the ones that you're trying to specialize. I think that's where you really want to minimize as much as possible. Now, sometimes you can't, but you want to try and minimize any of that systemic or just muscle spillover to the movements that you're trying to muscles that you're trying to prioritize. That would be like a big no-no.
Yeah, good stuff. All right. Vasil Zhelev.
A lot of upvotes here.
In Russian, Zhelev is very related to a word, Zheleyo, which means I pity you. It's like Vasil who pities you. It's pretty.
So he's like Russian Mr. T, basically.
100%. So, hey docs, thank you for always being at the community service. I would like to know a little bit about exercise sequencing within a session and the different outcomes that all the choices yield. I don't think it's a very discussed topic in the community. What's the difference between starting with a machine or dumbbells for, let's say, a push day, and then going over to something that's a compound movement? Is that considered pre-exhausting? What am I missing out on if I choose to go with barbell compound versus dumbbell or machine compound first? Also, how do the rep ranges change between these two choices? P.S. What should I change my picture to? I don't want to steal RP's thunder like that. Neither do I want to offend Mike by using his pick from the past. So first of all, you're not stealing our thunder, man. It's all fucking jokes. All benta in it, like the British say. So you can use anything you want. You can use picture with me currently, past RP. You could have a fuck RP logo. We don't give a flying fuck, dude. You're the man. You do you. We're just happy to have you along for the ride. But on the note of the question, so it's a very interesting answer to this. The first thing you're concerned with is priority. What muscles do I want to make the biggest in this program? They should be first. Thus, the exercises should address the muscles first. So you probably figured that, right? So you're talking about push day. If chest is number one priority, you got to go with something that really, really taxes the chest. So like, for example, if you say, okay, wide grip bench really taxes my chest, but like medium grip dumbbell press, like taxes my chest and triceps roughly evenly. If you're really serious about training your chest, then automatically that will go wide grip bench first. Okay, so that's first consideration. Second consideration, stimulus to fatigue ratio. You want your highest SFR exercises first, because the first exercise are the ones that give you the best yield. And then you want your best exercises first, because you essentially just amplify them the best. Like if you have two appliances in your kitchen or only one plug, you're going to plug in the appliance that like works better / you use more. You use your microwave 3 times a day and you use a toaster once a week. You don't plug in the toaster, you plug in your fucking microwave, and then you can unplug every now and again. So same idea there. Highest SFR exercises go first. So if you're looking at barbell compound versus dumbbell or machine, like you ask, like, well, which one of those 3 has your best SFR? And you're like, well, like it's the dumbbell press. Well, then that's the fucking answer, right? And so the third part of the answer is which one of those have the best SFRs and concordance with the rep range you're targeting. Generally speaking, you could do a variety of rep ranges within a week, but with any one session, you should probably, unless it's the same rep range each time, through the whole session for each exercise, that's fine. Mostly you start heavier and go lighter after. In other words, you don't start lighter and go heavier. That's almost never what you do. So like for example, if we're going to use an example of all 3 rep ranges, your first exercise will be in the 5 to 10. Your second one might be 5 to 10 or 10 to 20. And your third and fourth might be 10 to 20 or 20 to 30, right? It would almost never be the other way around unless you're super advanced. You got some weird shit going on, some weird pre-exhausting, you're managing injuries, axial fatigue, all this other crazy shit. So basically, if we look at your example, let's say you chose a dumbbell because it's great SFR, but you also know that you grow your chest really well with sets of 5 to 10. And dumbbells are just untenable for 5 to 10 because it's mostly instability and you waste half your energy trying to get them up to your fucking shoulders. So okay, actually, I'm going to do barbell wide grip because I really want chest. It's sets of 5 to 10, works perfect. And then after, I'm going to do dumbbell because it's the highest SFR, but I'm going to do it in sets of 10 to 20 where it's really awesome. And then I move on to whatever is in chest training. So that's basically how you would do figure that out with those 3 categories. And that yields a lot of stuff. Now there's more advanced considerations, pre-exhaust, using different rep ranges in sort of, higher reps first, but that's all stuff for like really exotic people that are just really dealing with a lot of axial fatigue and systemic fatigue caps. You probably almost certainly aren't. So those 3 are a real good place to start, James.
Yeah, great answer. And so I think where the confusion on this lies, like why it might be considered like taboo to do a machine or a compound or an isolation before like a compound barbell lift, I think is kind of conflating the like traditional strength conditioning world with hypertrophy training stuff. So in strength conditioning, you typically are going to choose the movements that have the best transfer of training effects for that session, for whatever it is. And those are typically going to be your kind of compound barbell movements. So in a typical strength conditioning setting, you're going to see usually like your weightlifting variants and like your barbell squats and presses kind of pretty early on in a session so that the athlete is the most prepared for those particular movements and can exert the most power or force. And other things like your kind of more hypertrophy-based things or more kind of work capacity things don't get interfered with as much at the back end of the session. Whereas if you did it in the reverse order, you wouldn't be able to exert as much strength or power if you did this other thing first. So in that sense, it matters. And so I think a lot of people carry that notion of like, oh, I got to do my squats before I do anything else first, just because they came from an athletic background. And that does make the most sense in that setting. But when you do hypertrophy training, we can really just wipe that whole notion clean and just look at the SFRs of the movement, which is what Dr. Mike was already talking about. So I think that's where the confusion, like you're not missing out on anything if you say, I'm going to do an isolation movement first and then a compound movement second, as long as the SFRs of those movements are in the correct hierarchy, right? Whereas like if you are training to become like a really baller rugby player and you're like, I'm going to do some knee extensions and then some power cleans later, that would be a clear violation of exercise order in that case. But for hypertrophy training, you don't have to worry about that.
All right. I threw in an extra question, James, because we had kind of a couple really good questions I wanted to hit.
Sure.
Next up is Kyle Hauser.
Got it.
Not to be confused with Doogie Howser, which is also like, so who is over? I think Doug and I watched the first episode of Doogie Howser because like Hulu has all these fucking weird old shows. You're like, first of all, it's wildly anachronistic. But second of all, what the fuck kind of a name is Doogie? That sounds like an insult.
It's weird.
Like his dad calls him Doogie.
It's like dangerously close to Doogie.
Doogie. Like, you motherfucker, you were named after a piece of shit.
Yeah. Also,
and he's also like rude to other doctors and stuff because he's like 12 and a doctor. Dude, if I was a fucking doctor on that floor and he fucking mouthed off to me, I'd take him in the back room and be like, I don't give a fuck who you are. I'll fucking ghost you right in this room, motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like Predator style when Bill Cook told the guy, like, whatever, Bill Duke, the actor, the super dark-skinned black guy, pulled Carl Weathers aside and he was like, you give up a position once again, I'll bleed you real quiet, leave you here. I was like, fuck yeah.
Yeah. He's that guy was kind of like Greta Thunberg with an education, right?
But ostensibly he knew things that actually like were real instead of like global warming's gonna kill us all tomorrow or whatever. There's a fucking sweet picture of like an 8-year-old smoking or something like that, and there was somebody memed it, and it was like Greta Thunberg says, "Guys, stop sharing this picture. It's not me." It really looks like her, just like smoking and singing.
Ouch. Also, Kyle Hauser is Kyle Hauser, which makes it sound
Kyle
like
Hauser, that's true.
Some kind of executable file. Maybe he's an AI.
Ooh, dude, recently people have been doing like this one guy on Instagram is like something Kyle.wav, like wave file or whatever, because he's like a music producer. And another guy's like Abhishek.jpg. And just like, you're not fooling anyone. Like you just put in .incel and it tells us everything we need to know.
James.pornwatcher.
Like, wow, that really describes you. Like, yes, I know.
I'm glad we're clear.
Connoisseur is more accurate.
Yeah, totally.
Do you remember Marcos knows like all the porn stars' names in their video series and stuff? Like, that's real dedication.
You know, like that's a handy skill because like sometimes you'll be thinking about a particular porn star, but you can't remember their name, and you're like, damn it. Who
Describe
is this?
my every like once a week when I fucking jack off. That's exactly what I end up doing. I'd be like, God damn it, what's that idiot's name? It's tough.
It's hard. Life's hard sometimes.
Life's hard. Yeah. That's the most first world problem you'll ever hear. So you're like, this is super fucked up. You're like a children's hospital. A kid like has no legs. He's like, it's tough. You're like, I hear you, man. Listen, let me tell you about, I was trying to find porn, right? I can't fucking remember this bitch's name. He's like, yeah, that really doesn't relate to me. I tried.
And then I finished, and then the next video that popped up was her. Oh, damn it.
I just had to
wasted
bookmark, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
Kyle Hauser finally asks, new parent here about to start a child on solid food.
Oh,
congratulations on acquiring a child.
Where is this one going? Oh, no.
It's luckily nowhere crazy. He's like, I wanted to start him on Bulgarian food.
Can my baby mini cut?
That'd be so sweet. When is the time for the first mini cut? Yeah. Do you guys know of any evidence-based practices that are known to help a child develop a healthy long-term relationship with food? There is no shortage of unreliable information, that's true, regarding feeding children on the internet, and family and friends are very quick to share their wisdom. Yes, often unrequested. I'm looking for something more scientific. My wife and I are RP veterans. We feel very confident with the foundations of healthy eating. Of course, we see a pediatrician regularly. I'm not looking to substitute for her care. Just looking for broad, long-term scientific strategies raising a kid that's less likely to have poor eating habits. If this is not in your wheelhouse, there's someone you can direct me to at RP. Thanks, Doc. So I got a couple of pieces of insight for you. So first of all, as you said, nothing replaced your pediatrician's advice. Never, ever violate her advice unless you think her shit is real wonky. Then go get a second opinion from another pediatrician or a dietitian that is licensed to work with very young children. Because sometimes pediatrician get on, like, I wish the industry was a little bit better. It's really good, but every now and again you'll get a pediatrician that's like no dairy because it's evil, and you're like, what the fuck are you talking? Like, I've literally like had friends be like, my pediatrician says no dairy for the kid after age 2, and it's like, what the fuck? Like, it's just nonsense, right? As a matter of fact, probably really bad nonsense. So she'll almost certainly be right about everything, but to the extent that you think she's really, really off, go see another medical doctor about it. So that is as it is. Second piece of insight, and this is something I've actually looked into considerably. They've looked at relationships, long-term relationships with food, and it turns out that from twin and adoption studies there's almost no detectable effect of the common home environment on someone's long-term relationship with food. So what that means is, like, if you adopt a kid who genetically, like, his ancestors had really shitty food relationships, like they just like junk food all the time. You adopt a kid, when they're in your home, you can feed them really well because you just don't give them any alternatives. As soon as they turn like 12, 13, 14, and they start going to school and getting food everywhere, they essentially revert back almost completely to whatever the fuck is their genetics were going to point them to. And some kids age into their genetics. So, for example, some kids will have parents, like genetic parents, that are really just awesome eaters. You guys know, like, some people just eat healthy all the time. It's just what they like. Like, my dad is one of these people. He just eats like fruits and veggies all the time. Sometimes kids age into that stuff. So when they're like 13 and 14 and 15 or even younger, they'll just eat like only cheese, pizza, and nuggets, sometimes mixed together. And the parents are like, what the fuck are we doing wrong? Then they turn 18, 19, 20, et cetera, and they start to clean up their diet, not because anyone ever told them to, like, because it just doesn't taste as good anymore. And they like eating clean. Like, I remember a distinct time when I was massing for powerlifting back in my natty days when I was like 20, and I went to get McDonald's and I ate it. And halfway through, I was like, I'm probably never going to have McDonald's for another year after this. And I didn't, because it just felt so awful. And I just naturally, like, I hated when my dad preached to me about, oh, Misha, you should have a fruit. Shut the fuck up. Get out of my life, Dad. Get out of my room. So, like, I never listened to a fucking thing he said. But now I'm an adult and I eat mostly healthy because it feels good. Turns out I have the same genetics as him and my mom, or very similar, right? And that's how it ended up being. So that is to tell you, Kyle, that despite all of your best efforts, this could amount to absolutely dick. However, if your kid's related to you and you like healthy food, there's a chance that they are going to get on that bandwagon. But what you can absolutely do is give them really, really awesome leg up on just long-term health by feeding them healthily in the home when you do control most of their food choices. Like, and when they go off on their own and they go to college, who knows, they might just like start snorting egg rolls or some shit like that. But like, I'm a real bad place in my diet. I don't even eat my food anymore. Like, holy shit.
We've all been there in college.
Right, for sure. Oh yeah. College is.
I was on that ramen program for quite a while.
100%, man. 100%. So, what you can, so just some basic outlines. We do have a book at RP that starts for children, more later children and teens. We do have a book by Paul Salter, and it has some really, really great insight. If you want to buy that eventually for the kid, you can take a lot out for younger children. But here are the sort of the foundational basics. First of all, there are no food groups that are off limits. None. So forget about that shit, okay? Second of all, put healthy shit in front of them that is also very nutritious. Do not feed them low-fat diets. Don't fucking do it, okay? So you should probably have like 2% or whole milk in the house. And whenever you present food to your kid, most of it, not all of it, should be really healthy. Fruits, veggies, some meats. They don't have to be super lean. Minimal processed food is fucking awesome. Now, there may be a situation where sometimes kids don't eat everything on their plate. Try to get them to a little bit. We're like, hey, you should eat your vegetables. And if they really don't want to, it's not a big deal. In almost every case, if they have access to it, if kids ever get vitamin mineral deficiencies, they self-resolve them by starting to crave things that address those. So you never have to stuff your kid full of shit they don't want to eat. What you can do is, if the kid isn't eating enough for dinner, blah, 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 and maybe their timing is off, and you're thinking, oh, fuck, like, I'm starving my kid because he never wants to eat anything, and I only offer him this and that. First of all, it's almost never going to happen, because when the kid gets hungry, he's going to eat whatever the fuck's in front of him. Like, if you get like children that are really in food insecure areas and you feed them anything, they fucking eat it immediately and they look up to you for more. Not that your kid wants to get there, but a really good snack to have around for kids is 2% or whole milk, and they can have access to it at some time, at any time they want. So it's been shown that even, as a matter of fact, especially high-fat dairy is wildly healthy, first of all. Second of all, it supports growth and development like crazy. Full-fat dairy is a kid-growing, like a kid-growing serum. Literally, it's literally what it's designed to do. So it's fucking awesome. So if the kid doesn't eat a lot at dinner, he should have the option of just like drinking a bunch of milk or some shit before he goes to sleep. And that's totally cool. And then just be real gentle and ginger about some shit. Don't make any crazy ass rules. But when they're in your house, they're really only have mostly healthy choices. And that means they can have some chips and ice cream every now and again. And it's not crazy shit off limits. But if you and your wife are eating well, breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks are fundamentally pretty fucking healthy, and a little bullshit here and there, that's really like a great thing to make sure your kid develops properly. And also, again, to my first point or second point, you don't have a lot of say in developing their adult eating strategies, but you might as well feed them good in the home. One thing that can take kids a little bit, even if they have the genetics to eat healthy, If they remember healthy eating as this awful, terrible thing that was foisted on them against their will, they may resist it longer. So if it's healthy eating is just something that you do and it's not like sort of like dogmatized, or there's not a lot of religiosity, you must finish your vegetables, you're evil, and cake is bad and veggies are good. There's just kind of a bunch of bullshit develops around that just doesn't have to happen. So just present them with foods, and if they don't like them, they can have the fucking whole milk if they get hungry. And that's about how that works. So James, anything to add there?
No, great answer. So this is completely outside of my wheelhouse, so I don't really have anything to contribute. I just double checked. The book that Mike was referring to is called Fueling the Adolescent, and that is available on Kindle for $9.99, or if you have Kindle Unlimited, it is free. Say what? Yeah, so I would refer you to either a what's it called? What's the pediatrician, or an RN or
RD licensed specifically to work with children, or extra experience working with children.
Yeah, so that's what I would have on that. Is that it for today?
No, we have 2 more.
Oh my goodness.
2 or 3 more. Yeah, we took a while on
God.
something. David Cook, who I thought it said
Lame.
David Cock. I thought it was Cock.
What a lame vanilla name.
Yeah.
Look at his icon's a lowercase d. Come on, David.
Come on, try. He says, hey, docs, I have a question about raw stimulus magnitude and stimulus to fatigue ratio, all bulking versus cutting. Should I put the best raw stimulus magnitude while massing or when cutting? For example, leg press give me great stimulation. They also exhaust me a lot. Split squats give me tremendous stimulus and low fatigue, but are not meat and potatoes exercise. Should I do leg press while bulking and split squats while cutting, or something else? No, I think you don't have to do these sort of dogmatically either or categories, but you're absolutely thinking in the right direction. Remember, the thing is that we always want as much raw stimulus magnitude as possible, always. However, it's the fatigue cost we may be less and more able to pay. So when you're in a cut, the fatigue cost just may be too much. So your best SFR exercises for sure have to be done during the cutting phase. Now, you absolutely should try to do your best SFR exercise while massing too, but it's okay to prioritize the high raw stimulus magnitude ones because they can make that breakthrough growth that is okay. Like, it's justified because you're massing and the fatigue can't ever get too excessive because you're recovering so well. So you can certainly go a little bit biased towards RSM on massing, but heavily biased towards SFR and cutting. And I think that's totally great. James?
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. Just keep in mind, right, like Mike said, don't do this dogmatically. Like, essentially, you're going to be picking your best SFR exercises during periods of massing or cutting, and then not while you're doing maintenance or active rest or just dicking around. So you don't have to necessarily separate them into like mass versus cut categories, because you can also run into the problem that at some point you're going to switch from massing to cutting or vice versa, and you might just have exhausted a movement that you've been using for a while, and you have to switch it just based on variation. So don't worry about that stuff so much. As long as it's checking the SFR box for you, you can use it in massing and cutting. There are some kind of minute differences in terms of the amount of fatigue that you're managing on a cut. But again, for the most part, I think you can kind of have at it either way.
This is, I don't want to perseverate too long on this one because we've answered a bunch of these over the course. As Diogo Simoes.
Now we're talking. Simoes.
So he says, hi, docs. Very Diogo. Hi, docs. Very simple question for you. Due to another lockdown in Portugal. I'm butchering that because, it's Brazilian accent. We always do. And I think Portuguese people hate Brazilians as far as I can tell.
Yeah, it's okay. Real super quick side story. When I think we were in Sydney, we had that Portuguese cab driver. So he was from Portugal and he was our Uber driver. And Mel just happened to pick up on his accent. And she asked him in Portuguese, do you speak Portuguese? And I don't speak Portuguese, but you could tell he was like, oh, you speak Brazilian. Like, not like you speak Brazilian, because he was like, oh, Brasileiro, which is like, oh, like feminine, like you're, Brazilian, which was really funny. And there's definitely seems to be, we kept trying to get Tiago and our other friend, Felipe, who actually gave me the shirt, to talk shit, and they just never do. And it's always disappointing.
Yeah, so Tiago's shy. And Felipe's not shy, but he, quote, hates everything about Brazil, in the language included, even though he's from there. He's like, no, man, fuck that place. Like, all right. We like it.
We try to put them together. Like, okay, have at it. You two go. And they're like, nah.
Nope. All right. So He says, "Hi, docs. Very simple question for you. Due to another lockdown in Portugal, I'm back to home workouts. I seem to have figured out how to program and hit everything while using ring, calisthenics, and weight. I own 30 kilograms plus 15 kilogram weighted vest. Great. The other thing I struggled to hit good are my quads. It took me a really long time in the gym to figure out specific deep hack squat machines to really hit them with good SFR, but I've struggled a lot more to replicate or discover a good exercise that doesn't just let my glutes take over. Any tips on quad trainers? First of all, like, James, doesn't it baffle you that this man's like English is a second language and he's fucking better at it than we are? That's fucking insane.
Got calisthenics in there. That's a tough one.
Dude, that's nuts.
Most Americans don't even know what that is.
For sure. Like, you speak better English than most Americans. And as a matter of fact, look, who speaks in America Portuguese as well as you? Nobody. Anyway, okay, so because you have rings, this is actually easier. So this is really sweet. You can hold your hands onto the rings to brace yourself. And here's a recommendation: single leg squats. Oh my God. Just enough holding of the rings to make sure that you're not falling over, and then fucking single leg squats, and that'll fuck you up. You can also set up, no problem, especially with rings and with the weight vest and the weight you own, James, what's that called? Bulgarian split squats or whatever. The split squats are fucking amazing. They'll fuck you up. You can do those first until your legs are real fucked up. And then you can do very heel elevated, almost sissy squats, or sissy squats themselves, supersetted to actual heel elevated squats. And that'll fuck you up to the point of no return. And then after that, you keep your weight vest on and do like walking lunges with as much weight as you have, but stay super upright and touch your knee gently every single time you descend so that your quads get a fuckload of contraction. And if you do that after like 5 to 6 sets of all that single leg shit and some of that hack squat stuff and sissy squat stuff, you're going to be in a position where like you're getting like 6 lunges at a time, and then you're nearing failure and you have to stand there for 2 or 3 seconds to get another 2 or 3 and so on. And that's as good as leg training gets. So I think that those are my best recommendations there.
Yeah. And sometimes for a lot of these movements, if you tend to be more of a glute dominant person, you might have to do like extra heel elevation on some of them. And that's something I have to tend to do in my home training a lot, where I wear the weightlifting shoe and then I heel it up even more, which makes it really shitty, but it really eliminates a lot of the synergy from like the hip extensors in a lot of those movements, especially something like a split squat where it's very easy to just let your butt take over and do all the work. So I think those recommendations from Mike are really good. And then maybe consider adding even more heel elevation than normal. For me, this is hit or miss. So it might be a miss for you. It's a hit for me. Sissy squats, when you learn how to do them in a way that is very heavy on my muscle, but doesn't blow up your knees. So for me, what I'll do is like a narrow feet out, paused for 1 second, sissy squat. And I actually will hold on to something like the cage.
The rings.
Yeah.
Hold on to your rings.
So for me, I need something more at my chest height, because I'll like lean back as far as I can into it. And that really seems to help me keep it on the quads and not hurt myself. Whereas some people I think need to stay a little bit more upright. So I'm like actually like going all the way back when I do these, and I have to hold on to something at chest level so I don't tip over backwards. If you're more upright, then you can hold on to something like a ring and it won't be as big of a deal. So sissy squats for me it's like I said, it's hit or miss for some people, but it's definitely a good one for quads at home. But you have to dial them in such a way that doesn't blow up your knees. So for me, sometimes I'll do regular high bar squats as like my main lift for a session, and then I might do what are effectively down sets of sissy squats at a higher rep range, just for some variation, because I can only do so many high bar squats before it gets kind of stale and old. So that's one that I use a lot.
All right, lastly is Antoine Bonzon.
Bonzon. I love that one.
Very French. He says, "Thanks a lot, question mark." Then he says, "What about the crazy DOMs one can get from full ROM stiff-legged deadlifts? I feel like I could only train my hamstrings once a week if I do those and do not want overlapping DOMs. Or I'd have to train with some kind of leg curl on one day, let's say Tuesday, and then do the SLDL on the next, say Wednesday. I would have 6 whole days between SLDL session and the next leg curl session, allowing me to get rid of those damn DOMs. What do you think? If anyone has similar issues with SLDL, please feel free to weigh in on how he solved it." So I got a couple of recommendations. One, take your volume and RIR to even lower than you thought was possible, or higher for RIR, relative effort lower. So what I mean is, like, if you're doing like 4 sets of 8, 1 RIR and it fucks up your hamstrings, join the club because James and I are right there with you. It would absolutely make us sore for a week. The typical volumes for hip hinge hamstring training are often a fraction of those they are for anything else, because the exposure of the hamstrings to tension and stretch and everything that makes them grow and damages them, it's fucking insane, right? So it's a good thing. So maybe instead of 4 sets of 8, try 1 set of 6 and then be like, oh, like I barely got sore. Then you can train hamstrings 2 or 3 days later. Then eventually you can work up to like 2 to 3 sets of 6 or 8, and you can train hamstrings twice a week. And yes, it is probably a good idea just to make sure the muscle is fully developed. And for fatigue management purposes, to do 1 hip hinge day a week and 1 leg curl day a week. But I would split them a little bit more evenly. You'll have to do way more leg curls than hip hinges to get the same degree of hamstring disruption. So those are my 2 best recommendations. And my last one is keep doing stuff like a deadlift with relatively low volume. And eventually you kind of get more used to them. The novelty effect at least goes away. And then you notice that you aren't getting as sore and you can do a little bit more volume. But fundamentally, it's a real good thing that your hamstrings grow super easily. They get sore super easily. And that's the deal. Just do much less volume than you think is necessary in most cases.
Yeah, that's absolutely the key issue. And very often what you'll find is that if you haven't done SLDs for a minute, the MEV is often like 1 set. And sometimes at even like a really unusual, I mean, you could do like 1 set at like 5 RIR and you're probably good to go. And then what you find is that, okay, the next week, maybe you do 1 set again at like 2 RIR and you're like, okay, that's better. And then you maybe add a set the next week. So now you're doing 2 sets at 2 RIR, something like that. The progression can be like unusually slow. And when you're looking at it, you're like, this is stupid. What am I doing? But it's just such a raw stimulus exercise for the hamstrings that you got to dial it back. It's kind of an outlier in terms of a lot of exercises in the progressions because it's just so novel in that regard. The other thing you can also consider is using some different variations. So like kind of as we talked about earlier in the webinar, I do mostly home gym, pretty much virtually all home gym. So with your hip hinge movements, they get stale and you have to think of different ways of kind of keeping them fresh. So you can consider doing something like deficit SLDLs, no belt SLDLs, least effective shoe variant. So a lot of people are really strong with a flat shoe and weaker with a weightlifting shoe. You can mix that up. You can do beltless. You can do wide grip. There's all sorts of crazy little things you can do. Sometimes I'll do them with the shrug bar, just for some variation, just because, like I said, that when you're working with barbells and dumbbells and that's pretty much it, like they do tend to kind of stale out quickly. Now you can play around with your grips and your foot position and stuff, but it is good to mix those up in case you start to run into the situation where you do have to do like 4 sets of 8 because your MEV's gotten up there. And that's when it's about time to switch to something else.
Boom. That's it.
Woo! All right. So again, thanks for joining us on this one. Friendly reminder for next time, we're going to switch to a bi-weekly schedule. So that means we're going to record on the 1st and 3rd weeks of the month, which typically means that they will get posted early in the 2nd and 4th weeks of the month. So we're basically going to be staggered with Dr. Spencer's videos. I'm sure there's still going to be other videos kind of going out every week. I think we're kind of shooting for, I want to say like 3 to 4-ish, if I remember correctly, videos per week, something like that.
Yep.
The weekly webinar will be staggered every other week at this point. So we just want to get some videos to get a little bit more attention, a little bit more shine, and that's why we're doing it. So make sure you guys keep subscribing. We've still got plenty of good stuff on the way. We appreciate all the good questions. We saw people were getting upvotes of like 46, which was really good on today's webinar. So I really like to see the engagement on that. So great job, everybody. Dr. Mike, anything before we sign out?
I think that's about it.
All right, folks, thanks for joining us again. Subscribe, and we will see you next time.